Chirohustle. Sit back and learn from the greatest influencers in the profession on the world's #1 chiropractic podcast. Before we dive into this powerful episode, please remember to subscribe to our channels and give us a 5-star rating on iTunes and Spotify to continue hustling. This episode is sponsored by Imaging Services, Chiro Health USA, Chiro Moguls, Pure Chiro Notes, Titronics, doTERRA, Sherman College of Chiropractic, New Patients in a Box, the Influencer Authority Podcast Training, Mango Voice, Community Healthcare Resources, and Invisired. Let's hustle.
Hey guys, welcome to episode 388 of the Chiro Hustle podcast. I'm your producer, Luke Millette, and here's your host, James Chester.
So today we had the opportunity of interviewing Dr. Erin Rosen. And if you want to hear the story of focusing on the cranium and the above atlas subluxation, stay tuned. Welcome back. This is another episode of the Chiro Hustle podcast. I am really add one more in there. Really excited to have Dr. Marty Rosen on here with me tonight. He has been a pioneer in some aspects of this profession with technique, but also helping with pediatrics, correct?
Yes, that's my thing. It's pediatrics.
Yeah. And before we get into this episode talking about all things chiropractic, I just set some ground rules for people and let people know our big why. Why do we do what we do on Chiro Hustle? Well, we protect free speech. And I think that is so important today. As people know that there's a problem with censorship. So we do keep that channel of communication open specifically for chiropractic. We protect the sacred trust. Even chiropractors don't know what that means. So I'd urge everybody listening to this to go out there and do your favorite search engine on your internet and say, hey, what is BJ Palmer's sacred trust? If you don't know that, figure it out. And just, find out what that means. And we do support subluxation-based chiropractors. We believe in innate intelligence that when a person gets adjusted, it connects that person physical to connects them to spiritual, and that's universal intelligence. So those are the premises of why we do what we do. And I figure every time I do this, it's important to let people know that because your friends, your families, your colleagues, and your patients are going to listen to this and they're going to say, who is this Jim Chester guy? And what is he doing for chiropractic? And what is Chiro Hustle? Well, now you guys know. So with that being said, you're episode 388, and I'm super excited to have you on.
I'm super excited to be here. I really appreciate what you do for the profession. I've just learned a lot about you, and it's just amazing the kind of work you do. And I'm so glad we're able to get this out here in free speech. Besides chiropractic and adjusting is probably my #1 hill to die on.
You know, what's interesting, I was just at a seminar out at New Beginnings.
Yep.
And they said something. They said, if you had to say one thing that was over and over that you would stand for, what would it be? And the whole room was saying their message. So there's no one could hear what you were saying because everybody was talking at the same time.
Sure.
And I said, I will die on this hill.
Right.
I will die on this hill.
There you go.
I will die on this hill. And that's principle to me.
Yeah.
And that's really the big message behind running this podcast is it's bigger than me. It's better than, just something that I did for myself. When I was, growing up in the ranks, all I heard was the people saying, tell the story, tell the story, tell the story.
Right.
And I saw this massive void. I'm like, people are telling the story to their practice. They're telling the story on the stages. But if I go down the street and get a sandwich and I ask the person down there if they, the chiropractic story, they don't know it.
No.
So I'm like, well, I was like, I'm going to just start building an empire by telling the story. So here we are today. And leading into you, that's my favorite part of this whole thing is the story, your chiropractic story. So I don't know it because I didn't ask you. I just read your bio. But if you could just share with our audience today what your chiropractic story is and how you got into this profession, I think that would be an amazing opportunity today.
Sure. So I have 2 parts to my chiropractic story. First part was when I was 17 years old, I was a hockey player. That was my thing. I played hockey, went to the State University of Oswego, played hockey, and preseason I was fooling around with a friend wrestling, and he decided to try and throw me over his shoulder. I decided not to let him. And the only thing that went over his shoulder was my arm. So he dislocated my shoulder. And being 17 and not being really aware, I wasn't quite clear what had happened, kind of popped back in, and I went on with my life. When I got home from school for a break, I went to see my physician, doctor, and said, hey, this is what happened, what do I need to do? And he looked at me and he checked me out. He goes, well, looks like you have some weak ligaments, and I think you should give up sports. And I was like, wow, 17 years old, hanging up the towel. So I was like, there's got to be something else. There's got to be something different. And so friends of mine, within the next year, was living in upstate New York. They were going to this guy. His name was Jim Spina, first chiropractor I ever met. I said, you got to go to this guy. He's great. He's great. We went to this guy's office, and he just adjusted us, educated us, and just kind of drove the chiropractic principle by his actions. And even to this day, 5 of us used to go there. Out of the 5 of us, 3 of us are still under care. So that's over 50 years of care. And a couple of years ago, well, a number of years ago, about 10 years, my daughter was actually up in upstate New York, and she got hurt. She goes, Dad, you know a chiropractor up there? And I said, I don't know if he's still there. She went to his office and was adjusted by his son. So, yeah, so that's part of the chiropractic family. It's always kind of, since that time, has always been around me, always been in my life. And that's kind of how I first got turned on to chiropractic, figuring there's got to be something else but giving up and retiring your life at 17.
So what's chapter 2?
Chapter 2. So what do I do with my life? So I go to school to be a lawyer, because I decided that for some reason I want to do that. And after 2 years of pre-law, I decided that's not working. So I start traveling around. I moved out to California to find myself, because in the days when I was in the 70s and late 60s, early 70s, that's where you went to find yourself. And I was working for this guy, had this great job, making a fair amount of money, doing this weird job of white walling tires of used car lots. We had our own business. And I was walking back into my bedroom, and all of a sudden this voice literally hit me in the back of the head and said, you should be a chiropractor. You should go to chiropractic school. And I'm like, where did that come from? And I was like, well, I'll think about it. And the next day my father called me up and said, hey, your grandmother just passed away and she left you $5,000. What do you want to do? I said, I want to go to chiropractic school. And so just that stopped. On the woman I was living with out there wanted to move back to the East Coast. And she said, if you move back to the East Coast and you go back to school and get your prerequisites, I'll pay the rent while you go to school. So this all just happened, and I never looked back. Went back, got my prerequisites, took biology, chemistry, and physics, went to Sherman College for a year, and then ended up in Life, graduated at Life University. And that was it. From that moment on, it just kept going. And it was just this little voice in the back of my head said, go to chiropractic school.
Wow. And I'm sure during this whole journey of 40 years, you've had a chance to meet some amazing people that have been in this profession.
Sure. I have met, my mentor, my number one mentor was Major DeJarnette. So the technique that I grew up on and sunk my teeth into and, started my chiropractic profession was SOT, sacral-occipital technique. And DeJarnette was the founder and developer. I met him in 1979 while I was still in chiropractic school. When it started in 78, graduated in 81. So I met him. I just thought he was the most amazing person. He had practiced chiropractic for 65 years. He died in 1992. At 92, he was still practicing. He still had a third floor. He wrote about 150 different manuals on technique. He was just an amazing man. I learned so much from him. Then I met Van Rump, Van the innate man. And he can't adjust and nobody can. He came to Sherman when I was there. We brought him there. And just these old time, I met Clay Thompson. I met Pierce. I met Harrison from CBP, who took over from did CB. Well, actually, he did his whole Harrison model, but it was based on Pettibon. A lot of it was based on Pettibon's work. And we just met all these old time chiropractors that were just dedicated to chiropractic. I mean, they didn't worry about insurance. They didn't worry about coding. They didn't worry about EHR. They didn't worry about any of this stuff. They just adjusted people. And DeJarnette, like I said, was still working, teaching He started out, by traveling from hotel to hotel, teaching 1 or 2 people. When I went to his first seminar, there were 600 people there, all learning technique. That was it. So yeah, I was blessed by meeting a lot of the great chiropractors. I met, Reggie Gold. One of the people that turned me on, one of the organizations that turned me on was the original Renaissance with Joe Felicia and Guy Riekman. Their philosophical constructs and their practice management, subluxation-based chiropractic. I still use that stuff today. I still show in my office the 1984 video on subluxation degeneration to my patients on their second visit. Of course, I get a lot of comments because they're from 1984, but I still use that video to explain x-rays to them. So yeah, it's been my chiropractic. It's been a growth, but it's also been based on a foundation and shoulders who people let me stand on for years and years and years. And I totally appreciate and honor everything I've ever learned from all those people who came before me.
That's quite the message there, and I honor that because I don't get a chance to get that type of volume of connection on this show too often. I mean, today I interviewed a guy; he's in his first year.
Yeah.
Another guy was in his second year.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's really cool to be able to hear these stories and to be able to make this this tapestry of connection and
Sure.
document this profession the way that you just shared that story.
Yeah, it's great. And my daughter's a chiropractor. I have 2 daughters. And my wife's a chiropractor. I met her at Sherman. And we've been married for 41 years. We met at Sherman. My older daughter lives in Colorado, actually. And my younger one is a chiropractor. And she says that, Dad, she goes, you were so lucky. You just met the people who, started this profession, the people who are on the front, literally the front lines. Dijonette graduated chiropractic school in 1924. So yeah, you met these frontline people, and they were inspirations, not by the way they spoke, but the way they lived. That was the inspiration.
Well, today I think the future of chiropractic is going to be based on how we control the media and the narrative around it.
Absolutely.
And that's really what this is, conversations about something that really, really matters. And that's chiropractic.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit of marketing. Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it.
So over the years, what have you done that's really worked that you like? And what have you tried that you would say, don't do that?
So you got to remember, I opened my office in 1982. The first thing that we did that was marketing is there was a man named Peter Fernandez, and he used to run chiropractic practices. He used to help build chiropractic practices, and he had a book, 1,000 Ways to Grow Your Practice. And what we did, I'm a good talker. So the 2 things I did is we took this survey, which was like a 10-question survey, and we went literally from door to door, my wife, myself, and our little baby in a stroller, and we knocked on people's door and said, hey, we're the chiropractor. We just opened up in town. Do you mind if we ask you these questions? And we'd ask them questions about their health and about chiropractic. And then the last question would be, hey, we'd like to share what chiropractic is with other people. Is there any organization or group that you belong to that would like to have us speak? And we got invited into people's houses, and for the first 2-3 years of my practice, I spoke to every club, the JC's, the Italian American Club, the Kiwanis Club, garden clubs. I did 5 to 7 lectures a month in these clubs, and I talked to Shackley distributors, whatever it was, senior citizen homes. And we went and we did chiropractic presentations. And at the end, we'd offer them usually to come to the office for complimentary spinal exams. And I remember I talked once to a Shackley conference. I got 25 new patients from that. I talked to a senior citizens home. I got like 21 new patients from that. The other thing I did, which worked really well, is I was a runner. I did triathlons, but I did a lot of running. So I joined 2 running clubs called the Middlesex Striders and the Framingham Track Club. And I would go to every race. Even if I wasn't running it, I'd go to every race, and we'd set up a booth. And we did 2 things. We did a blood pressure screening and a spinal screening. The blood pressure screening would get all the people over. My CA would take their blood pressure, and then come over and I'd do a spinal screening. And at the end of the spinal screening, we'd hand them a little packet, of information, and also say, look, this is what we found. We check off the boxes of what we found on the spinal screening. Said, if you really want to go further with this and, deal with whatever issues you have, then come to our office, call our office, and come from complimentary exam. So we built our practice either me lecturing or hands-on doing spinal screenings with people, and it worked like a charm. I still have patients that have been with me for 35, 40 years that I met in those particular venues.
Wow. I think I have a lot of admiration for that because getting out and meeting people where they are and
Yeah.
going out there and shaking hands. I tell
Yep.
people this is my marketing is the more hands you shake, the more money you make.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I did those spinal screenings. I did the Cranium Track Club. And then I also, because again, athletics was a big thing for me, I would join health clubs. And I joined a health club. And what would happen is I'd go to the manager of health club and say, hi, I'm going to your health club here. I'd love to give a lecture on, proper exercise. And they would set up a room and put an ad down on the billboard downstairs or on the whatever it is, the bulletin board downstairs. And people would come to the lectures. And I would lecture on, proper exercise. And I would always tie everything back to chiropractic. Always tie, like, whether it be exercise, whether it be nutrition, whether it be a garden club, whatever it is, I'd always talk about what their venue was so they connect. And then I'd bring it back to chiropractic and how it can help them basically improve function, increase their optimal potential, and allow the body to do what they wanted to do for the rest of their lives. And so I did a lot of that.
I love this. I love it so much.
Yeah.
And let's fast forward to today.
Okay.
What are you doing today to do outreach, and what are you doing for the chiropractic world today?
So for personal office outreach, we have a waiting list practice. So we don't really do any major marketing. We do market on Facebook and Instagram. We have a person who does our marketing, puts up memes and stuff like that. It is low level marketing because, in all honesty, at this point in time, I really can't take too many patients. And I just had an associate, and they just left, and I'm deciding where I am there. But we stay on top of things. So I have an Instagram account, I have a Twitter account, we have a Facebook account. My wife does tons, Dr. Watson, Dr. Ansel does tons and tons of on our Facebook. Most of our marketing these days is for our seminars. So we do a lot less for new patients because we get new patients, and I'll talk about that in a minute about our referral base and how it works. But we own a company called the Peak Potential Institute. And the Peak Potential Institute is started by me and my wife, and we run seminars for chiropractors, technique seminars only, hands-on and online seminars. We have a whole online program, a lot of pediatric courses, also adult courses in SOT. And so that is where we do most of our marketing for the Peak Potential program. And we have, I think, 5 or 6 Facebook pages that we use for different organizations and our personal ones. I was doing reels for a while. I got kind of lazy. But we do that kind of marketing. So we're on Instagram. We have a marketing person who we pay, hourly rates, and she just puts stuff up as seminars come up and things like that.
That's cool. So let's dive into the seminars. Let's talk about that.
Sure. So my passion is teaching, and my passion is technique. So taught my first technique seminar with my wife when we were still in college. We were still in chiropractic college, and we taught an SOT seminar. So I've been teaching seminars for 40 years. I taught for a company called SORSI, which was the Major Dijonet's first kind of major seminar system that he started up that people helped him with. I taught for another company called SOTO-USA, which is another SOT company. I've taught for the ICPA, the International Chiropractic Pediatric Association, for 15 years, and I've run my own seminars. They're called Dr. Rosen seminars, and now we've branched that out to the Peak Potential Institute. And we've mostly taught hands-on until COVID hit, and then COVID kind of creamed us. We were teaching an average of at least twice a month. I think my biggest year I taught 28 weekends.
Wow.
And we taught all over the world. Taught in Australia, New Zealand. We taught in Europe, Italy, England. We taught Puerto Rico, Canada, all over the United States, and they're all technique seminars. In 99, 2000, I was asked to set up a pediatric program based on SOT principles. So I wrote the first pediatric program for SOT. And ever since then, I've modified that and changed that. And that is, we offer a pediatric certificate course, which covers pediatric spinal and cranial adjusting. It's a hands-on seminar, 3 hands-on seminars, 16 hours each, or you could take it online, and it's a 40-week program that we do online as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very, very impactful, I'm sure.
Yeah.
A topic that I don't get to talk too much about on the show is the cranial adjusting.
Sure.
Talk a little bit about that. And I know most people are really focused on the spinal column.
Right.
Why is it important to check the cranial bones?
Well, if you talk about nerve impulse and you talk about gray and white matter, 80% of it is located in your brain. Okay. And just when we think about spinal bones being either tense, out of position, however you want to define the subluxation, it causes interference to the transmission of mental impulses, and it causes interference to the emission of nerve impulses. Well, the cranium is also attached to the spine directly through the neuromeningeal system. So distortions in the cranium also affect traction on the nerve root and affect the way nerves are transmitted, especially from the brain to the spinal cord and back. So if you think about this, if you just think about, we talk about impact, and we talk about how somebody gets a subluxation. And a subluxation is when forces outside of the body or inside of the body are too much for the body to adapt to, and the system breaks down, and that creates a subluxation. It's almost like a stopgap method. Well, just think about the simple fact that if your jaw isn't functioning right, and you open and close your mouth 2,500 to 3,000 times a day, every time your jaw opens and closes, it creates a minor distortion pattern. And that distortion pattern is transferred into the muscles, into the cranium, and the dural system. So it sets up aberrant patterns, just like if you're working at a desk all the time and you're leaning down like this and you spend the whole day like this, it creates stressful patterns in your spine. So it's important for the cranium when you're dealing with what's called the neuromeningeal system, which is basically the system that protects the spinal cord and controls cerebral spinal fluid flow, that attaches all the way down to the tailbone, comes up through the spine, attaches to every dural port as the nerves exit the spinal column, attaches up into the cranium, and then comes up into the skull and forms membranes that protect the brain. So D.D. Palmer talked about tone when he talked about the nervous system, too much or too little tone. Well, the neuromeningeal system is that control system that controls the tone in your nervous system, because it attaches to the epineuron of the nerve and attaches to the bone. So any distortion changes tension in that neuromeningeal system. So why cranial work is so important is because the very tight attachment to the dura is right at the base of the brainstem as it comes into the foramen magnum and the area that covers our brain. So very often when chiropractors reach plateaus with their patients, we often find that's when we get a lot of referrals from chiropractic, that if we can just tweak that little linchpin, make that cranial adjustment, that will release even more dural tension, allow the nervous system to function better, basically change the tone in the central nervous system and allow it to transmit impulses correctly.
You've made it to Chiro Hustle. Sit back and learn from the greatest influencers in the profession on the world's #1 chiropractic podcast. This episode is sponsored by Imaging Services, Chiro Health USA, Chiro Moguls, Pure Chiro Notes, Titronics, doTERRA, Sherman College of Chiropractic, New Patients in a Box, the Influencer Authority Podcast Training, Mango Voice, Community Healthcare Resources, and Invisired. Let's hustle. This is fascinating because I know we didn't prepare for any of this stuff or any of this type of conversation, but I'm more curious now than I care if I ask the questions that I have. But
that's okay.
If somebody does have some type of dural tension in their cranium, what is it? I know this is probably a hard thing to answer on the interview, but when you get somebody and you check them, what is the I guess, how do people respond to that, and how frequent do you have to see somebody as opposed to like when you get checked and adjusted weekly for chiropractic? Like
no different. So it's the same parameter. So look, I got my little skull here, little baby skull, right? So this is the sutural system, right? And then we have our adult skull over here, right? So these sutures and these areas are mobile, just like the spine is mobile. So we use the same parameters. So when I palpate a cranium, so you palpate a spine, you palpate the muscles, right? You palpate the movement, right? And we do all that. In this cranium, we do the same thing. We palpate the muscles over the cranial bones. We palpate all these landmarks. We palpate the sutures, and we use range of motion. In other words, I can have someone open and close their jaw and move it back and forth and see how the sutures move in the cranium.
That's
so
fascinating.
When people set up a pattern of subluxation, whether it be in the cranium or spine, what we do is we monitor that pattern and make adjustments based on how that pattern is changing. So for some people, I may see them every 2 weeks, when they're on whatever, like you just said, or someone comes in once a week when they're in intensive care, we may see them 2 to 3 times a week if they need to. And what we do, just like for the spine, so whenever I adjust somebody, I don't just adjust the cranium or the spine. I look at the whole picture. And when I give a report of findings, I tell them what the pattern is in their spine and cranium. And when I re-examine them, I'm looking for changes in those patterns, and that's how I base my care frequency. So so in some cases, obviously, if someone has an injury, like we just had a patient who called up, said, I need to come in right away. I was standing outside a hospital and something fell on my head and knocked me unconscious.
Wow.
So, right. So there's a cranial trauma. We'll actually have to start to, we'll put her under intensive care till we change that. No different than if you were walking down the street, slipped on ice and fell and smashed your tailbone onto that would be an intensive injury that we'd have to monitor.
Well, I would think that you would probably get a lot of referrals from like fighters and people that are like actually like bashing themselves up.
It's funny you said that. We deal a lot with concussions. See a lot of people with concussions, but one of my friends in California, he works with MMA fighters. He worked with women, and he got a phone call from some guy on the East Coast. He had heard about him, who's a boxer, and he wanted to come see him. And he goes, "Oh no, go see Dr. Rosen here." He had broken his nose like 3 times, So we see a lot of people with head trauma, not necessarily fighters and boxers, just not because I focus a lot on pediatrics. It's not really the venue that I attract from, but a lot of concussion people, a lot of athletes, soccer players, hockey players, basketball players, kids, teenagers, from concussions. I have people who have had 6 concussions by the time they're 16 years of age.
Wow.
So we deal that. I would say that would be more of my bandwidth, is dealing with kids, teenagers, and adults with concussion type of issues, especially people who've had concussions and they haven't resolved yet. They're still facing post-concussion syndrome. And again, that's where we look at the cranium, the damage to the cranium.
Well, there's a lot of things I want to ask you, but I don't think I'm going to get to them. So I'm going to just cut to the end of this. Tell us maybe 1 or 2 miracle stories that you've seen over the past 40 years. And I think that if you could tie in the concussion type that we've just been talking about, have you seen anything like really like just?
Well, my favorite, I had a 23-month-old boy come into the office who could not walk and could not talk. He had no ability to do that. He had no ability to walk or talk. He was actually referred to me by another chiropractor because they felt like the spinal stuff that they were doing was stabilizing, but it really wasn't changing the kid's functional capabilities. So they thought maybe the cranium would be an issue. So I started adjusting this little boy. And about 3 weeks into care, he came into the office. He was still in his wheelchair. He wasn't walking, but he looked at me. He opened his mouth. He put his finger in his mouth. He went, "Dr. Rosen," because he wanted me to adjust his cranium. I adjusted his cranium. Within 6 weeks, he was walking and talking. And, we saw him until he was about 7, till he moved away. And he continued to improve to walk and talk. And this was a kid who was not able to walk and talk. And the cranial work was the thing that pushed him on, because the chiropractor that sent him to me was a very good chiropractor and was doing a really good job. It just wasn't making that next step for that.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of times I'll talk to a chiropractor. I've talked to thousands of them now, but I'll say to them, "What are we doing for the above atlas subluxation?" And I usually liken that to as a mental problem.
But we used to say that. So that's what we used to write. They have a problem above atlas, which used to mean they're crazy and forget about it. But now in my world, it doesn't mean that. So I'll give you another example. This is with an adult. I get a call from a friend of mine who's a dentist, and I started taking care of this woman. Just had a couple of visits with her, and he called me. He goes, "Jan's in the hospital. She tried to kill herself. Will you come and do a hospital call?" So he actually got permission for me to go into the hospital. And I walked into the hospital, and she was lying on the bed. She had taken an overdose of medication, tried to kill herself, and they didn't want to give her any meds. And she was hooked up to all these monitors. And so her heart rate, was somewhere around 96. Her blood pressure was like off the charts. Her blood pressure was like 200 over 140. Right. And her respiratory rate was almost double, was almost 32 as opposed to 16. and they were afraid they were going to lose us. He said, will you go adjust her? So I went, I got behind the bed, and I checked out her spine. I checked out her cervical spine, and I adjusted her atlas. And then I knew she had a problem with her cranium TMJ, and I adjusted part of something related to her temporal mandibular joint and that part of her cranium. And as soon as I finished, after I adjusted the atlas and that, all of a sudden the monitors started going back to normal. And everything, and they watched it. The doctors were like freaking out because her respiratory rate went to 16 and her heart rate went back down to around 72 and her blood pressure dropped to, I think it dropped to about 130 over 90. And she just kind of chilled out. She spent the next 3 days in the hospital, got out of the hospital, came back to my office as a patient, stayed under care until she moved, never had another episode, never tried to kill herself again. Yeah, that was pretty amazing.
Yeah, you've changed my perspective on chiropractic today.
Oh, awesome. That's my job then. I did my job.
Yeah, I've talked to many people in this profession, and no one's ever explained to me so well how we can change from the spinal column to the cranium, and we can take people that might have been a chiropractic case that weren't getting results,
right?
And this is the missing link. I think cranial work is the missing link.
I think it is very often is a missing link. The thing that is amazing about DiJarnette, and I always really make sure patients understand this, I don't do cranial sacral therapy. I do chiropractic cranial adjusting. And what is different about it is DiJarnette believed in subluxations, and he categorized people into 3 parameters of the subluxation. And with each subluxation category, he also determined a cranial link or a cranial compensation pattern that occurred because of the spinal pattern. So we actually codified that into those 3 categories. So if a certain person has a certain structural issue or a certain germinal issue or even a certain ridiculous syndrome issue, there's specific cranial adjustments that he found that works in those areas. Now, obviously, I started that way, and over 40 years, I've also found other interrelated cranial findings. But yeah, we find cranial patterns and subluxation patterns in the spine correlate. And so they have to work hand in hand. It's not like I never do one without the other. Always clear. And one of the things I teach, and when I teach it, is we always want to clear out the spine first, because what we're trying to do is get the message from the spine up into the cranium. If that is a problem, or we're not reaching the goals we expect, functional goals, then we start to look at the cranium. But we start at the spine and work our way up into the cranium to get that dural system moving. Again, 2 things that the dural system is doing is it's changing tension in the central nervous system and tension on the nerves. So back to tone, the DD. The second thing it's doing is it's moving cerebrospinal fluid, which is the lifeblood of the central nervous system. That is the lymphatic system for your central nervous system. So if that's blocked, imagine how sick you get when your regular lymphatic system is blocked. So the cerebrospinal fluid system is the one that helps clean out the waste products from your central nervous system.
Yeah, this is fascinating. And, I know we could probably talk for another hour on this stuff, but let me just ask you, so people have told me, and I don't know, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a researcher.
Right.
But when people go to sleep at night, the cerebral spinal fluid drifts up from the spinal column and goes into the skull, and the sutures of the head expand, and it kind of washes the brain. Is that true?
No. Cerebrospinal fluid always flows. It's exchanged about 4 times per day in both infants and adults. The only thing that changes the amount of cerebrospinal fluid that's available is deep breathing. So that when you breathe deep, the ventricles fill and open, but the system it's called the primary respiratory mechanism because it's constantly going. It starts in utero and it's working. So the system flushes. Sleep is part of the time where that heals. And why sleep is important is because the brain slightly slows down, so it's not creating as much waste product, so it's easier to reduce the toxins in it, but it's not like cerebrospinal fluid all of a sudden blows up, fills up, and flushes out. It's exchanged 4 times a day, every day of your life. And then, again, sleep is the time the brain slows down. It's able to remove more waste products. And the only, like I said, the more available it is the deeper you breathe, the more relaxed you're breathing, the ventricles expand slightly more. So that does increase the amount of cerebrospinal fluid available.
Wow. So let me ask you this then. When do these 4 times happen? Do you know?
Well, it's just 4 times throughout the day. It's just, that's how long. It's just, you breathe 16 times per minute, whatever. It's an exchange. I do not know the rate or what changes that rate. I just know that in the literature, it's the amount of fluid that gets produced and then gets removed from the system happens 4 times a day. I don't know time frame.
That would be the ultimate biohack.
Yeah, there you go.
If we can pinpoint that window, we can find performance.
It might be there. I haven't actually looked at that. That's something I haven't even thought of. See, that's great. So now you opened up my mind. Now I have someplace else to research. That's awesome.
Because if we could pinpoint that,
Yeah,
then we could optimize people's ability to recover.
well, I think what the idea behind it's not like all of a sudden it's a process. Like they're just saying, so like if you have a gallon of fluid, it slowly leaks out and slowly refilled. So it takes 4 times a day where that gallon leaks out and refills. So I think it's a continual process,
Well, if we could teach people how to optimize that into their lifestyle, like just the whole process of understanding that, because most people are unaware of that, I guarantee you. So if that became something of a topical discussion, like your body regenerates 4 times a day through the cerebral spinal fluid, through the cranium, through the autonomic nervous system. Now we can figure out how to make a change in people's lives. And that excites me.
Well, we can. Number one, get them adjusted. And then from there, everything else is secondary.
Well, like BJ said, get the big idea and all else follows.
All else follows, exactly.
Well, I want to come see you. I want to come have you check out my cranium and just.
A lot of people say that. Yeah, sure.
I'm sure. Whenever you have this type of a conversation and the information's so powerful, why wouldn't people be curious to know if there's something that they could do to improve their livelihood?
Yeah. I have people come in. I've had chiropractors come in and say, hey, I just want you to, see what you do. And I'm like, you don't understand. It sounds like it's not the one adjustments. It's the same with your spine. It's a process. Like if you have, spinal degenerative, spinal subluxations, you don't go to chiropractor and go, oh, I heard you correct subluxations. I'd like to give you one adjustment and see how it goes. It's like, no, that's not what we do. It's not a dog and pony show. It's a process, just like everything else. I can't move a cranial bone from point A to point B in one adjustment, just like you don't take an atlas and move it 2.5 inches in one adjustment. That's called killing somebody. It's resetting a pattern. It's creating new neural pathways, changing dural tension. It's a process, but it's an amazing process. To see it happen is incredible, to see people's lives change.
Well, this is fascinating. We're at the edge of our time, but if people want to know more about what you're doing, send them to peakpotentialprogram.com.
That would be the great place. That would show all our classes and all our books.
And so if you guys are watching this and you're curious about what Dr. Marty is doing with his technique seminars, go to peakpotentialprogram.com. And if they want to check out your website, is WellesleyChiro.com, and that's WELLESLEYCHIRO.com.
That is my office website. Yes.
Yep.
And the other website you can check us out on is on drmartinrosen.com, which is drmartinrosen.com. And that's also a Gmail address, drmartinrosen@gmail. You can catch us at any one of those places, and on Facebook and on Twitter. No, not really Twitter. Go on Instagram. I don't tweet.
Well, this is it's definitely one of my favorite episodes I've ever done.
Oh, well, thank you.
I'm thankful for your time and your interest to doing a chirohustle podcast with me. You are episode 388, and I just want to say it's been a real pleasure.
I enjoyed it. I had a great time. I'm glad I piqued your interest, and I'm glad we were able to be, loose enough to kind of change course a little bit. It was fun.
I thought we did an amazing job, and we're protecting free speech.
Yep.
We're protecting the sacred trust. We're supporting subluxation-based chiropractic, and we're supporting innate intelligence, universal intelligence, and that's the premise. So
awesome.
Thank you for making yourself available, and I want you to have a great rest of your night out there in beautiful Massachusetts.
Thanks a lot, Jim, and thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. I look forward to seeing you in person one day.
All right. Yes.
All right. Bye for now.
All right.
Thanks for listening to Chiro Hustle. Don't forget to subscribe and check back next week to continue hustling.